coming back to the purpose of the free press, the free press is an institution that allows for all different types of voices to contribute, but not the astroturf voices that are just taking up space and energy and, in effect, distraction. Because that's the opposite of a forum. That's a trashed venue. So if they can trash a venue that way, that's how they do it. So don't let people trash your venue. If you're, especially, just imagine how valuable that is when you have different types of experts freely exchanging ideas without being sidetracked by where everybody gets along and wishes each other well in the spirit of general prosperity. May you and yours be well. But what is yours? What is you? Giving people the ability to change. Also at the highest leadership levels, if you're entrenched in a leadership position, then adopt these new principles instead. Let the old ones go. Do a reverse phase. Change your course. Let things go. Let grudges go, but also don't let yourself get rolled over by people that are greedy just because they think they can, because they want to. It's not the road to civilization, never was. So if you're civilized, then work towards that instead. It's okay. It's not like you're going to achieve anything for it worth what Padujana would demand in order to do something noble. And yet there's people who are noble enough that would do it with or without the money, mostly without the money. But you can't be solely without it, so do relegate it. Don't see it as necessarily a bad thing if you can provide a service that is in line with your values. Why not? Not everyone wanted to be a farmer, but doing farming, there's nothing wrong with it at all. In fact, there's a lot of right things about it. In fact, your whole life can be messed up, but your farming can still be on point. So the 80% of your life can still be quite excellent and good, even if the other 20% is totally wasted, just like the farmland. You can have a patch that just nothing will grow on it. You don't know why. You could do the science on it, but there's no point really. It's just a curiosity. Just keep it moving. You've got the 80% that does yield good. Don't be a perfectionist. You will be disappointed. And disappointment is not skillful. It's like breaking your own damn tractor on purpose. Making life more difficult than it needs to be. Just make do with what you have. You have an 80% crop. It's good enough. It's actually quite excellent. But do that 10 years, you might have a different average. In fact, 1 year might be nothing, or 2, or 3, or 4, or 5, or 10. It has happened, it will happen, it can happen, it is happening. And as much as you can just imagine a perfect crop, and you can compare real life to that and be disappointed, as much as it's easy to do that, it's also easy to just let that go and be grateful for what you have. That you got to experience this life on this planet, in this realm, as a human being, so that you could develop spiritual resilience. That's the main thing. It's not the money. If you can attain these goals, they're good for you, they're good for others, and they're good for your future and past lives. It changes the fatalism, it changes the trajectory of your life. So do not hesitate to transform, and yet on the other hand, journalists, journalists are exposed just like political people are exposed. If people stop reporting the truth, nobody can take any type of equitable decision. If there's not an admission of the reality and the pragmatism of what is actually happening on the ground, there can be no cogent decision making, which is the antithesis of good leadership. And so it would be better if all of these disputes were settled, and yet if they're not settled, then you can't will them into being not settled with your mind alone. Some things take time. Some people have to knock themselves out before they'll admit they were wrong. And some people take it to the grave, their delusion that they were really doing the right thing the whole time. These types of dogmatists, we're going to have hundreds, thousands of those in the near future, if they haven't already all kicked the bucket yet. But that is what this realm does. So it was the same process in the Middle Ages, as in antiquity, as in pre-antiquity. We have not escaped the destiny of human existence as human beings. And if you're listening to this, certainly you share that fate with me, with us all, with the human community. So it doesn't really matter what language you speak, and yet, of course, moral decorum, physical decorum, national decorum should be respected, because it is how we evolve and develop. So everything up to that point is correct behavior, everything over that point is inappropriate behavior. And people do make mistakes, sometimes tragically, fatally so, because they just took it a centimeter over the line. And it really is unfortunate, because they didn't have to do it, but some people are tedious and boorish, and they push it that far, and then they're really surprised when the roof falls down on them. They're not as important as they mistook themselves to be, with their completely deranged egos and expectations and desires, just like any other human being could defile themselves into being that way, seeing things that way. I want to be this, I can't be this, so I'm going to destroy that. Isn't that the barbarian tendency? Isn't it everywhere? Hasn't it always been everywhere? And yet still, good leadership need not have patience for it. If good leadership can get some good people behind it, you don't have to have fecal matter in your bodies of water. You don't. It's called having rules and standards and also enforcing them, which also means sustaining them. Not always having to explain them, especially to a bunch of people that don't want to understand in the first place, because they got some type of axe to grind, some type of false narrative that they're obsessed about manifesting in reality, when in fact it's just doing nothing but causing innumerable crimes. And so how can they be good in the details if they're wrong on the big picture? Sometimes it's good to just switch lenses, pull back from these arguments. What is going on and who's rationalizing it in what way and why? Who benefits? And then you really have to think if the people benefiting are worth all the other problems. Because if they are, there really should be a good reason for it. But if there aren't, then there seems to be some type of mistake made by some unskillful people that didn't have their ambitions under control, got misdirected and agitated in the wrong direction can happen. How many of you have been in bars where there's a small violent altercation and somebody tells the dummy something and the person who tells him first didn't know what happened in the first place, and somebody who had nothing to do with the incident gets sucker punched? That's sort of what's happened to Western civilization with all of its highfalutin ideas, all of its idealism, all of its naivete, all of its misdirected modernism, all of its pessimism, all of its criticism. So it's understandable that we have a basket cased situation on all different types of fronts that we didn't believe that could possibly be attacked by modern methods that have proven these old timers completely wrong. So the old timers are not going to be with us forever, but the new timers are not planning on having any new timers figure out these things before they slide into the garbage heap to oblivion as an entire culture, multiple cultures, peoples, regions, zones. So if you're not up on that new way of seeing things, then you should be at least now. At latest, at this very moment, you're now informed of what's actually in play. So how you go about that with your little rationalizations, justifications, pushings, and finger pointings, and explanations, and gesturings is quite another matter. But let it seep in. Give yourself time. It does take time to let these things gain clarity, because it's really just so shocking. So many things all at once that you can be disoriented into thinking one thing or another. But taking the international view, like pulling out of your little local region and then zooming back in and pulling out and doing comparisons, and having journalists that aren't co-opted by corporate interests, that are financial interests, which are questionable, that are geopolitical, is generally a good thing. So whatever informational diet you have, you should put that under full review. And if it smells fishy, or if it goes fishy, just delete it. Just erase it, delete the app, and go different ways. Even if there's nothing there, then just exist in the nothing there-ness, the potentiality of that, and then perhaps build incrementally, or at least just survive. It's a bad time. The Justinian plague was a bad time. This is a similar type of time. A lot of people didn't make it. I would rather that you make it. People like you make it. People like us. The civilized, forward-thinking, positive, optimistic, enthusiastic, charismatic, witty, victorious faction. The laughing faction. The comic faction. The succeeding faction. The uproariously popular faction. All for good reason. Why not? It's happened also in history, so you have good and bad times all at the same time. But the more bad you can keep out and the more good you can keep in, the better for us all. And it's not just you, it's everyone. Everyone matters. Always be able to walk away. Always think about walking away when you wake up in the morning and you are looking at the morning twilight, the dawn. See, I like to think in terms of twilight and dawn because they're a beginning of something and an ending of something. Ending of the night, beginning of the day, ending of the day, beginning of the night. You have two magical times if you experience one day. And yeah, we always talk about one day after another. We're going to work for a year, commit ourselves to a year. 365 days times that by 2 times. Now, if it's cloudy, that's a different experiment, a different reality. If it's sunny, and then the seasons, there's different types of light because the earth is also tilting, it's wobbling on its axis, and so winter light is different than spring light, and summer light is different than autumn light. It all has to do with the angles and whatever's flying around in the ozone. And you can see that even more dramatically when you experience the northern lights. You can see all these ions just bouncing off of the earth, and how variable it is, how variable all this cosmic energy is that's blowing like a wind over the earth that you're not quite conscious of, and yet it's happening. It's only in some places you can see it at certain times. And so if life is a spiritual journey, and spiritual resilience is much more important than materialist place on it, if it's really true, and it is true, you need to take time, expand your concept of time, expand your sensitivity to it, your conception of it. Chances are you have a very behavioralistic or conditioned sense of time. Oh, it's this day at this time, I should be here. You were trained and conditioned that way in a post-industrial society to be busy. And only when you're being busy are you fulfilling your obligations. And apparently there's a general social obligation, and there is a social interaction, and all of these things, we all learn them. And yet, just imagine the education process is not similar, it's not uniform around the globe. What I'm describing is a Western experience. You go someplace else, it's completely different. People don't have that concept of time. People are able to be quite content with what they have or what they don't have, what they don't know, they don't have, they don't care about, just like everywhere else. And so take those times, more importantly, don't think in terms of contracts either. Contracts with people or contracts with companies. And realize looks can be deceiving. It's just the way it is. And this is a process that you will find again and again. And in complicated or multi-layered organizations, for example, you could meet 5 people that seem more or less okay to you, but the person you didn't meet is a decision maker, and they say no for reasons that are good for them, bad for the company. Go figure. Isn't that a surprise? It's like, oh my goodness, what a surprise. And yet, this is just how organizations are built. You can be disappointed with that, or you can just walk away, because it's actually not them walking away from you, although that is also one half of the equation. But it's you certainly acknowledging that walking away from a situation that can't work because one piece is not working in it is a situation that can't work. The boat looks great, but there's just, oh, look, this one square meter section, there's a gigantic hole. Who would have thunk it? It looks like a great boat on the outside. You walk to the front, you look to the back, you open a hatch, there's a hole. What? Surprise! It can happen with boats, it can happen with companies. And if there's a hole in the boat, there's no point. The less time you're spending on that boat, the better. Now, some people drive around on the boat. They're getting attached to the boat, they're getting habitualized to the boat, and then on day 21, maybe when they're out someplace exposed, they open that hatch. It's not a good feeling to be in. So, but even if that were to happen, that's not necessarily certain death. It's okay. How do I turn around real fast, change my plans, and get back to a place where it's convenient for me, or as convenient as possible for me to jump ship? And why wouldn't that be the right thing to do? Certainly it is. Oh, look, all of a sudden the ship is sinking. The person that didn't see that hole, or that hole didn't exist for them, they didn't think it was significant, might not have, again, even experienced it, even became aware of it. So they go down with the ship, pretty surprised, and they're surprised when it goes down. Now, if you knew there was a hole, you're not surprised, but when it's going down, perhaps you've more prepared yourself for that eventuality. Maybe you've even taken some precautions, like at least maybe you're 10 kilometers closer to the coast that you don't now have to swim. Whereas before, let's say you were 24 kilometers off the coast, now you're 14. Can you swim 14 with a flotation device? Maybe. If you have a wetsuit and fins, probably. It's not going to be easy though, but that might just be enough. And boy, do those 10 kilometers really count. And you were able to do that if you had commandeered the ship and went back at 90 degrees, this wouldn't have happened, but you had to do it by degrees, and still those 10 kilometers, that's skillful. That's skillful. You shouldn't discount skillful, because if you get into the perfection of it, because that's what our mind will do, but if you only did this, see this looking behind you, if you only did this, if you only did that, this would have been perfect. And then you create this court of the mind where you're wrong. Of course it could have been perfect. You're right, Judge. I'm still not guilty because life is not perfect. And we're looking at this now with hindsight, which is 2020. At the time, none of this, there was no idea that there was a hole in the boat. Okay? And it's completely plausible that someone would not have assumed there was a hole in a boat like that. It's a stupid assumption to have. You will never get on a boat if you assume that the boat has a hole in it. Why should it have a hole in it? So you can forgive yourself. You were fooled, in quotation marks, but fooled by what? Fooled by Mara? Fooled by the sense realm? Fooled by naivete? Fooled by being a good person? Having the assumptions of a good person? That one, for example, was not dealing with a criminal sabotage, that is deceptively going under the radar for geopolitical reasons, for example. Geopolitical, socioeconomic, cultural, designs by global players that are claiming to be friends, and on the other hand, letting these operations be carried out under the auspices of just general crime. These are, or ideological explanations that they use market groups on. So it's not, they're constantly asking people, well, what would sell you on this? And so they ask these hundreds and hundreds of people, and then they come up with something that's highly deceptive. What would make you think that we're more competent? What could we do now? And they say, well, wear a yellow tie, make sure you're very well groomed, very well spoken, and then say these things, and don't say those things. And so you have to imagine, like, actors that are learning a part for a play, their part changes from day to day, from week to week, from incident to incident. So they have a whole theater crew working on keeping them slick and oily and saying the right things that they can. But whether or not they carry out policy or follow up on their words is a completely irrelated matter to them. They have their own agenda. So it might be their politics to claim to be for one thing while undermining it on the other. Because it has benefit because the polling says that they should appear to be behind it. But lo and behold, nothing they do is even remotely competent. The competent people they send in end up surprisingly sabotaging the whole project, something like that, out of politics. And so, but what can you consider these people? I mean, of course it's not all of them, but let's just say 20% of them are like that. That's more or less how much damage they can do. Now, also, people use the word, what would you use for that? I use the word saboteur. I say it's a duplicity. Could be connected with bribery, or it could be a host of other reasons. Could be ideological. So if you create a culture that gives these people space that are the most toxic and misguided and misdirected part of any enterprise, that's just a general cultural attack. So, and the results are just destruction, economic, social, and political destruction, just more long-term, more indirect. So if somebody throws a stink bomb or a smoke bomb into a movie theater, all that has causality. These cultural attacks, although they're identifiable, there's not really causality there. They can always claim that they see it their way. It's their opinion. Right? We live in a free society, so that's their cover. Oh, but your whole program is exactly the same. It's a AstroTurf, exactly the same formula as is going on in all these other different related places, except for the fact that there's people willing to be paid to propagate those positions. So certainly on some level it's organized. The further down you go on the useful idiot ladder, the less hard it is necessarily to pin it to some other causality. And so you have to think, like, why is it beyond our imagination to think that geopolitical actors that had known hostility for everything that your country and people and culture stood for, that they wouldn't try to find some openings and for the purpose of bringing things down instead of building them up, making them stronger? That's not what they're in the business of. The more things go wrong on your side, the better for them. That's how they see it. So they massively funded and organized those types of programs, and we're still stuck in the West in this stupid time where that's considered to be just natural. How we turned from like a first class country into like a third world country. Like there's no real other explanation for that. Except self blame. That's what they'll give you. They'll say you were responsible because you were a bad person. That's what generally they have a victim blaming final kick in the butt into exterminationism on your final way out. Because of course it was all about you, not about them. Like, of course. Oh, it was the finances didn't work. Something like that. Whole host of excuses. So, but this is this earthly realm. This is an earthly realm that has something called superbacteria in it. So if you go looking for it, you're going to find it. You go rolling in it, and in fact, it might come even if you're trying to avoid it. You're trying to wash your hands. You're trying to keep up basic hygiene. If there's food that looks rotten, you bring it a little bit close to your nose, and you smell that. You won't eat it. So, but it's there, and even when you don't eat it, you don't smell it, you don't see it, you can get infected because you're living life. You're moving around. You're not in a bubble. You're not locking yourself indoors. And even there, bacteria is microscopic. It can fly in a window really easily. You open the door, there you got spores. So it is what it is. You go into the hippopotamus pen, you're going to see hippopotamuses hippopotamusing. You go to the microscope, look at the bacteria, you can see it doing what it does. And so, yeah, war has bad results. Wars create the zombie armies, zombified people. And you'll say, oh, that's taking it to extreme. But look at the Chinese. They're in an controlled information environment. So imagine the things they're learning passively, day by day, is debilitating them, is giving them wrong ideas about basically everything. They don't directly experience themselves. And then, of course, what are they directly experiencing? They're directly experiencing peoples whose minds have been warped by false, misleading, and self-serving information. So how much personality do they have or could have had under those environmental variables? How much of a distortion is there? Did you have to deal with the distortion in human form based on, and then they're closed off. They don't, oh, new information, this is a lie. There's people that do that. A lot. Look, people below, I don't know what the average IQ, well, let's say 100. Let's just take it. People under 100, no chance to see through those types of deceptions. Absolutely no chance. It could be higher than that. I mean, let's just say 80% of people are not capable of seeing through. Let's say 50. Let's just, it's more than we think. It really is. But still, how much of a warpage are we talking about? You could talk to a Chinese person about 10 things. And imagine 88 of those things are wrong based on what was drilled into them. 8 of their assumptions are wrong. How much value can you place on interactions with a person like that? Or is it in fact even detrimental to be around people like that. Or how about this? You can still be around people like that, but you don't need to engage them on the things that they're wrong. Maybe they're right about two things. Those two things might be more valuable than the 8 wrong things. And finally, if they're peaceful and they're generally moral and they're taking refuge in the refuges and generally living moral lives by following the precepts, then why should there be a problem? And yet, although that's possible, you can always take things to a global level, and you can see that there's certain competing interests, certainly as far as people think the direction of the planet should take, and their hell's dead set on going one way. And to hell with what other people think about it. Now, I won't say to hell, they do make the barest of efforts to explain themselves, but finally, a lot of what they explain is not truthful. It's just a way of maintaining face when direct questions are asked, and they don't have a culture of people asking them direct questions. They're the ones that just give the answers, so they're fundamentally incapable of doing that on a governmental level, at least in this time. Their government doesn't really have people like that. They have a couple of showmen, but it's fundamentally alien to their culture to have anyone ask them questions about what they do. So then you have to think, well, is that a superior culture, or maybe not? Like, what part of that culture is part of our culture? Is that a culture that should be considered an improvement? Why would that be? Certainly an improvement for people that don't like answering questions. Imagine that. If one day they have to answer 100 questions, the next day they have to answer 0. What do you think they're going to choose? Ideally, they wouldn't be answering any questions because there's no questions being asked. Or maybe it's softball questions, like they have 5 versions of softball questions so that they can make it look like there's a question and answer session, but they've studied it in their laboratories to be a win-win situation for their public relations, in terms of the public finding them credible and likable versus dastardly and misleading. So is perception reality? Well, for them, they want to make that perception their reality. So if they're slick enough to do it, they're going to be certainly doing turbo back slaps and butt slaps for themselves. And there are funky chickens that have been doing that for a while now, apparently. So I wonder if they have like their hair, like they have this special gel that makes their hair like shoot up, look like a little pigeon plume, and then their Savoy suit. Like maybe they have like 100 different suits for each day, little glittering shoes. For all that money they were able to abscond with during the great robbery and heist of the 90s and early 2000s, the lost 30 years, straight into Chinese banditry. That's something someone should write down, that historical time. This is certainly the 30 years of bandits, we could call it that way. Maybe it'll be 40 years of banditry. The way things are looking now, maybe so. Will it be 50? But here's some information that came out. Their GDP, which is already a misleading index, it really doesn't mean a damn thing. Maybe bankers have a reason or two for making it as important as it is, but they inflated their numbers, so their economy is no bigger than Japan's. So despite all of their inventive numbers, that's basically what it is. So there was one economist who's like, yeah, authoritarian regimes, you should take off 35% of you should give them a 35% deduction for being authoritarian. And then she used other ways of analyzing economic activity, like satellite photos, energy consumption, things that scientists can use to accurately predict what's actually produced. And he said it's about the size of Japan. Now, Japan has been declining since the 90s, which is also quite unsurprising if you consider that this is what we're going to call it the 30 years of banditry. So, well-managed, well-regulated companies and economies went down. Theirs went up from like the size of Angola's in the 60s and 50s or 70s to the size of Japan. Okay, that's pretty impressive, you could say, but if you take it in a world context, what did they really do for anyone outside of that place? And then inside that place, what did they really do? They now have a system. If they hold up a piece of white paper, they go to jail indefinitely. So is that prosperity? What part of that impunity? Of course, there's a few people that benefit from that. But how many people don't benefit from rules like that? Then you've got crazy population rates, misleading information. Of course they're not overpopulated. They're actually declining. That's probably not true. Just completely destroyed environmental situations. No normal economy possible. Just how about this? During the building boom, they built paper mache buildings, more or less. Like they siphoned off the business for the concrete or the ingredients of the concrete, so it just like disintegrated within 3 years. They have it down to like a science. Building never gets finished. It maybe goes to 70% completion. They sell a bunch of apartments to people that have to prepay. Give them a great price, right? And then it never gets completed and the whole building falls apart. But there's no real follow-up on those crimes because it's got some type of roof at some point via officials that are supposed to be there investigating such things, but maybe they got half the take. So when they stop all journalistic exchange, like you can't have free journalists reporting on things there, that's a pretty damning indication, isn't it? It's pretty shocking in a lot of ways. So we're talking a billion people, billion plus, no access to outside information. In fact, it's a crime if you do that. Wow. Isn't that a precedent? So, yeah, pretty shocking. A lot of ways. There's a lot of funky business going on. So, we were born into these times. There were other times. There were the warring periods. There was just centuries of chaos. There were warlords. There was opium wars, reverse opium wars. And so this is just the worldly plane. This is the worldly plane, and there are worse times to be born in. The Irish potato famine, bad times. Holodomor in Ukraine, terrible. Imagine those people. We're here. We're in the breadbasket of Europe. Never has there ever been a famine, ever. In fact, people that were starving to death would migrate there because it's just a super abundant place from the standpoint of agriculture. Of course, the people and everything else. But no, it becomes mismanaged, poverty-stricken place of a major famine where millions of people starved to death. So weren't they surprised? Imagine that. Wouldn't you be surprised? There's like their whole evolution in all of time had never accounted for that type of wonky possibility. Just imagine that. And yet, it happens. So there are times and places and people and things that, for example, the culture of the United States could become so Mandarinized within the course of the last 30 years. That a culture that was built on truly innovative and free, participatory, democratic forms of government has become what it is today. More or less just based on the basic oversight that the Treasury was not given the responsibility that it was supposed to fulfill. And private interest came in just at the top, just severed the money from the politics. That's what the little surgical cut 1913. Since then, it's been just a matter of time. Now, can they rewrite history? They'll try it. These were the old bad times. Then we took over. Then everything went straight up like Deng Jinping or Deng Mao Zedong. The Rocket Man. It'd be funny to understand, see what type of Rocket Man they would create. So, but yeah, you have this private interest and you have the public interest, and the public interest is not always the interest of the private interest, and so what we're seeing today is like late stage banditry combined with geopolitical aspects and actors. So, surprise, right? It's a big surprise. Like, oops, didn't see that coming. I guess, with hindsight, you could say, well, there were so many people that could have seen that coming. But they didn't. Or if those that did got rolled over. So now we've got what we got. What happened to the Han Dynasty? Everybody wants to know. Not everybody knows. Even historians try to put the pieces together. And so, but did Lao Tzu live during the Han Dynasty? What is the opinion? Because that's one man that didn't get through life without a couple of knocks and blows and hits and stumbles. See, everyone expects a master to have never been hit, but that's not how life works. How many times was Lao Tzu knocked out? That would be really interesting to know, and yet these are the gory biographical details that he, oddly enough, did not include in his later works. Because again, how relevant was that? You can more or less assume that he had a lot to deal with and did deal with it. And that he developed. And that he died. He knew when to go. He died. He knew he was going to die. And how many of Lao Tzu's have there been that didn't write their books, didn't walk out at the right time, didn't leave behind their teaching? So this is your life, and this is your day. Whether you will get another one nobody knows, including especially yourself. And so that is a great freedom from the oppression of what you believe to be the past or what you believe to be macro forces at work that are keeping certain boats with certain holes in them. Doesn't mean you need to sail on those boats, or if you do, it's a temporary thing. Get on one boat, get onto another, maybe get off boats, get to an island, and just manage what you can, not overestimating the malign forces in your time. There are no guarantees. Nobody gets out of this life alive in the sense of retaining what they have. What do they have? And so you could see it as a dynamic process. You don't have to see it as a prison. Although there is also causality, there is also fatalism involved in all of these things. However much freedom you've been given in your life, that is also a reflection of karma. And some of you live miraculously free despite all of these other things, these other variables involved, and so why not be free? You want to have not just 1 billion people under a system like that, you want to have the entire world under a situation like that? Nobody wants it. But again, you can't see these political hijackings as an attempt to convince you of their better system. It's just enough to have you just not do something, to see the threat for the vital threat that it is. And then later, when it's obvious, they'll just shrug and smirk and say, well, weren't you a sucker for believing us? How many naive Westerners have seen that smirk before being completely ground out, up and spit out? So, but to come back to the Republicans, because it's really, the Democrats, okay, they're horrible on domestic issues. Internationally, they more or less, they did what, actually better than expected. So now when we come to the Republicans, that also, who knows what their domestic plan looks like, but they needed to do a whole lot more than they're planning on doing. There's a Toryfication of the Republican Party. This has been going on since the neocons in the 90s. These are people that come in, oh, I'm conservative. They're not conservative. They're airbrush PR people that are connected with other people that just lie in the camera. That's what it is. And so they've been there, and they just keep trying to grow to the majority by any means necessary, because then they'll be the Tory party, which is to say the crappiest of democratic parties with austerity too. And keeping face, making sure you got your shaved face and your perfect haircut and tie as you mesmerizingly tell total lies into the camera. So, but of course there's people that can see these fakers from a mile away, and of course they don't like that. So there's division. But what I did notice is some of these puffballs, cream puffs, Toryist imposters, they'll come out and say, yeah, they need to stop this war immediately. If they were in office, they'd stop this war immediately. But what does that mean? Stop defending Europe. Because it's not just Ukraine, it goes all the way up. They're threatening Poland, they're threatening Slovakia, They're threatening the Baltics. They're threatening all of Scandinavia. Scandinavia has had its head up its butt since forever. They're a walk in the park, a lot of them. Now, Finland, Sweden, now part of NATO. A big deal. Well, now they need to start putting some actions behind those diplomatic gestures. They need to ramp things up big time. All these other countries. Who knows? Again, the Balkans are a basket case right now. It's a mixed bag. You've got geopolitical adversaries working with impunity in countries around there. And it's an old game. This is not new. But nothing's being done about it. There's just a lot of hybrid activities. So where the war could go, it could spread to the Balkans, which means also into Anatolia, because that's where a lot of the hostilities are coming from. So we have a NATO member that's working against NATO, and that's from Kosovo to Libya to Ukraine to, again, the future war in the Balkans. Not because anyone wants one, but because there's just a lot of warlike actions going on there that's not being addressed properly. So, and then a war in the Baltics absolutely could happen. And of course, Scandinavia, everyone thinks that's safe bet. Nope. Now with the sea ice melting, they want all of Scandinavia, and they want England too. So that's another thing. These fat cats, stupid money, strangled Brits and Tories, and a fake Labour Party. Mandarins, in other words, for financial, global, above the law organizations. They're completely unprepared. They're defenseless. They have no navy. Think about that. England, Britain, the masters of the seas, all of that. They don't have a damn navy. They have one funky aircraft carrier or something. They need three. Got to rotate these things. They're always going to be in for repairs. Shipyard shut down. Who knows what they're doing? Oh, they were watching the stock market, but then they closed the worst trade deal in history. They Brexited themselves out of the EU trading union. And they got little boats that can't even stop rubber dinghies from coming in. So they've got thousands and thousands and thousands of human torpedoes being shot every day, being helped off the little rubber dinghies by constables that are just following orders. So UK is in a bad way. And whether or not they're going to get run over or extincted, it's a 50-50 bet at this point. They're certainly not taking it as seriously as they should. Their own domestic internal security, not just what's going on the borderlands, which again could very easily spread if it hasn't already. I mean, certainly on the hybrid level, you look at places like Moldavia, they've already started. Georgia already started, already there. Again, Belarus, already there. Again, all those Balkan states need to be completely reviewed. Then you got the EU, a bunch of mandarins in there. I'd say there's like 80% of them have questionable affiliations. Now it's okay if they're the rubber stamp, they'll rubber stamp a check for defense, but where that's being spent, by who, and how much you're getting it for it, how much of a bang for your buck, all that needs to be put under some type of oversight, which does not exist at this point in time. Which brings me back to oversight for the entire financial industry. So the Treasury Department takes over the bank. That's one move that needs to happen if we're going to get into some type of reindustrialization, which is absolutely necessary. But in a reindustrialization, it takes the people that it's serving, its native citizens, treats them like the precious resource that they are. It's not just using it and burning it up, but cultivating it, not overworking people. It's 3 shifts. Do it in 3 shifts and do it 4 days a week, not 5. Just be that much more productive. If a worker can reach the productivity of someone in 1950 using modern equipment, why are we not paying that person double? But instead of paying one person double or triple, why not just put in 3 people so that person is not getting burnt out of wasting his life doing something that should really only be a part of it, not the whole thing. Not this materialist culture, keep working till you die, and they keep raising the retirement age. That does not produce enough resiliency, redundancy. That is a slave driver's program with predictable results, just total atrophying of the entire communities and associations, civic societies, total desertification of that. For poverty, working poverty, and given in exchange, because there's nothing else there. If somebody needs to tweak things to make that much more in a game that's already sadistic. So sadistic, it just really tortures animals before they die, before their time. It's the way you could see it when societies are mismanaged to the extent they are now. It's not true. In Venezuela, a good example. But we don't have time to save the world. Let's start with Europe. Start with Ukraine and the UK and start looking at countries that have had good success and start emulating those policies and not running after maniac goals, misguided maniac goals. But of course, yeah, that's a lot to put on someone's plate, which is good. There's a lot of things to consider all at once. That's what living is all about. But they're also producing a lot of noise, just a lot of agitatory noise. So you need to learn how to tune out from that and tune out from people that are tuned into that. Take care of yourself. These times, trying times. But it's always been trying times. It's just this is a different type of trying time. But we absolutely need not just European solidarity, but transatlantic solidarity. We're all in this together. We can do it better. We've done it better. We can do it better. We will do it better. It's a good idea to always be witty, always be lighthearted, always be cheerful. Or at the very least, just being neutral. That's not even very least, that's the most sustainable. If you're a skilled person, just being completely neutral, because it is the things that we desire and crave that causes us suffering. Especially if we want more than we have. And so it really is just a matter of scale. The billionaires that still want more, they're in a state of suffering. And they're also deluded into thinking that that is the right way. If they didn't believe it was the right way, they wouldn't have gone that way as all in as they have. And so you also have to understand, for them to back up, to turn around, to doubt what they've accomplished or how, that runs into then the ego problem as well. So they have solidified egoic personalities that are dead set on desire and craving. And so that's pretty bad combination on both three sides. I mean, it's really interesting. If you go to the extremities, you can see the extremities of humanity, you can see the extremities of these basic factors at work. And so for me, it's always coming back to the basic factors. That's the most important thing. How different personalities represent those factors is less interesting. Especially because these people are not defined by they define themselves by their egos, but they could let them go in the spirit of no self, because there is no self. If they could wake up tomorrow with amnesia, they'd probably be better off than somebody come and tell them, oh, you're this person, you founded these companies, you're engaged in this and this and this and this type of flim-flammery. Oh, you have this meeting to go to, you have to take care of this problem, and on and on. Look, greed does not bring these people to good places. If you think they're living without irritation, you're absolutely wrong. Their whole day is buzzing hornets of irritation. Now this can turn some of them into sadists because they're punishing themselves. They can't be satisfied, then they start punishing others. So you take that up to a higher scale and you increase the severity of it, and then we're talking war. Blow these people out. Blow up as many people as you can today. And that's your orders from the people at the top that don't lead skillful lives. They've led worldly lives, not skillful lives. Now, is there such a thing as skillfully worldly lives? Good question. Now, Seneca believed that you could be rich and good. And I think it's true. I agree with him. But you can also be rich and bad. And unfortunately, I do believe there are less Senecas than there are of the other variety. And of course, it's all in terms of degrees. There's gray zones. They might be good at this and that and terrible at just this one thing, but just this one thing is worse than everything else good they did. Just like Quakers, Quakers want to be these great new innovative people, and they took that idealism straight off into being impractical. So instead of creating a heaven on earth, they created a hell on earth via what they thought were right principles, but that was the delusion. They were deluded in their principles, and the results were, to, let's say, skillful people, very predictable, but for them it was a complete shock. So shocking, in fact, that they created denial for themselves. They would live in a state of denial and also a state of internal conflict of values. So here I am thinking I'm a moral good person, but the results of it are just unbelievably, shockingly, hideously bad. That it's the cognitive dissonance is so great that they could live in a state of denial. And a state of denial is, no, this isn't happening. Or, there's that little meme floating around with the dog with the hat and everything's on fire. And he says, everything's fine. That's sort of what late stage post-Christian Quakerism devolved into. And yet, before you point the finger at them and laugh and think, what idiots, well, they're the ones that define the modern financial system that you're living in. So that might be, you haven't really perhaps guessed it yet, but that is a pretty bad situation to be in. And there's these people who are all in on the digit game of wealth. They're not just living that system, but you're living in that system. So now someone could say, well, here, you're pointing fingers. This is all of a sudden, this is political. Look, any fingers I point, I want to take them back right now. Just imagine me pointing a finger. Now have me point to the ground. I'm not pointing fingers. They were overly idealistic. They were idealistic to a fault. So, but idealism itself can be a good thing to a certain extent. The extent to which it becomes a bad thing is the extent that you don't usually realize it's become a bad thing, and then you're stuck in a bad place because of delusions. You know, delusion is, why is it considered to be non-existent? Because delusion is nearly impossible to see. You can only see it if you use the tools that non-self give you. If you're already seeing things from the standpoint of self and ego, you can never see your own delusions, your own self. And so it's normal to be deluded, and they, because they were idealist, their delusion was of a different variety, a very, very tricky and deleterious kind. You can also forgive them for attempting to do things better, and in a lot of ways they did do things better. I would say they did 80% of things better. It's just that 20% proved fatal. So that means even billionaires, you don't have to per se consider them criminals, although many of their acts could be classified thusly if one were privy to their business, which one is not, thankfully. But one can think of them as just deluded, and a deluded person at scale. And delusion is really something that doesn't pay like one thinks. So there should never be any of this. See, it's common, it's vulgar to envy wealth. But that is not the path. You don't want to take their wealth away from them. The key is not being wealthy in the sense that they are wealthy, not being a materialist. But of course, having enough to eat with a lot of freedom and a lot of peace and quiet and contentment, and being able to experience this miraculous, marvelous, spectacular earth that we inhabit. A greater gift from God has never been bestowed on such a people. And yet here we are squabbling about digitry. So no, hating the billionaire is the wrong way. Having some compassion for the billionaire as a deluded person, which is normal, is the right way. Now, as far as the billionaire themselves, they can heal themselves. They can remedy the situation. But of course, giving up money willy-nilly is also not necessarily the right responsibility, is it? If you happen to have it, where do you apply it? If you put it to a bad place, you're really not doing anything good with it. So the high responsibility of that job is something that will have its own causality, will it not? Not just in the material realms, but certainly in the socio-psychological, spiritual realms. That, again, if they're deluded enough to think don't exist, well, that is part of the causality of what their existences will be. What keeps reoccurring in their lives, in their samskaric lives, they're leading themselves around by the nose and tail type of lives, worldly deluded lives. So, hell on earth, it does exist in certain people's minds. And some people are too far gone. They are too encased in their ego. They're like tungsten projectiles being blasted in the wrong direction. They're just that dense. But others, they have a chance. As long as you're alive, as long as you're breathing, you can turn it around. The junkie listening to this, you can stop taking drugs. You can. Just like you can stop scratching your left buttocks if you so decide to do it. You decide to stand up, or you decide to sit down, you can do it. Well, anyone can stop anything, and especially bad behavior, greedy behavior, taking more than you need, depriving others. Now, of course, others, so apparently there's been some type of charity, for example, for China the last 30 years. I don't know where anyone, what type of humanitarianism that had to do with, but that's that's not helping the situation. So again, we come back to delusion in personal life, a delusion in politics. I think I'm doing the right thing. I'm negotiating for peace, but my peace settlement would actually be an admission, an allowance of violent behavior. So if you think a judgment like that is just, you're wrong. So you could produce that judgment, but people aren't going to like it for good reason. But you think you're doing the right thing. You see how there's that disconnect? Just think always in terms of abstractions, because you can apply them to different real instances and they hold up to be true. So in this case, a full restoration of the national borders is to nullify any gains made by those on the attacking side that had no legality to do so. And then also payment for damages. And I would say, it would be difficult to collect on those payments, but because we're talking about greater Eastern Europe, that stretches to far beyond the Ural Mountains. We're talking about a fabulously wealthy defendant. One that is not even close to a fraction of as wealthy as it could be if it was ruled in a modern way with political legitimacy, which is possible, but it's not easy. And as far as I see it, it's just a technology question. If you have the technology and it's been peer reviewed and there is an international committee that keeps publications going, because it's not just good for one country, it's good for all countries that adopt the system. And then it's a process of the native harvesting and distilling the native talent of these countries that then work for the benefit of all in their country specifically. And also, other countries that adopt these principles should not be be committing any type of hostile actions amongst other member states. In fact, all countries that adopt these principles and this technology should be considered brothers. And not just that word that we bound about, but these are strict adherence to political values that entails allowing native talent, i.e. the most talented individuals a society has at any given moment in time, to be the administrators. But not in the sense of administrators, they're the guiding lights, the guiding lanterns of their section of forest, wherever it is on this planet. And you do have to have a certain blind faith that this type of system, when implemented properly, will bring about not perfect results, especially not in the beginning, but better results than we've previously had. And you think it's, this is science fiction. Well, when there weren't cell phones, people, the thought of you speaking into a device and talking to your friend in Greece, halfway around the world, clear as a bell, that seemed, and for every reason in the world, to be an utter impossibility. Today, what else is new? People don't think twice about it. And what created that? That was technology. So technology has bad sides, no doubt. But these good sides, can have a multiplier effect on other good things. Now, in a country like Ukraine, even if there's only 100, but there's a lot more than that could be good representatives if they are engaged in such a way, if they're allowed to filter through the barriers, then of course they can turn the country around from a third or fourth world munitions dump to first in the world in like every level. And when we're talking every level, we're not talking about GDP, we're talking about social, political, and economic well-being, work-life balance, modern ways of living that leverage our massive increases in productivity thanks to specialized machinery and technology. So it's about leveraging these things in a holistic, comprehensive way that is not totalitarian, is not a ripoff, but rather turning the faucet on. It's irrigating the dried landscape. It's not just, you should think in terms of the overused farm acreage. You keep trying to blast out grain every year, you're going to wear the soil out. And that's what we've experienced with these taxation regimes. They've just been strangling. It's more or less a protection racket. It's been strangling people out for the benefit of the Mandarin classes. So they don't see a problem with it. Like, why should the wheels fall off this jalopy? That's the way they think about it. Oh, they've been saying this for the last 20 years. Nothing's happened. You can see this in Belarus, that part of Central Europe that is now occupied. But if you go further into Eastern Europe, well, that's what they're doing there too. But all of that can be changed, and in fact, if we do care about Eastern Europe, we need to care about how they govern themselves and their relation to us in the years and decades and centuries to come. Because whether Eastern Europe shrinks or breaks up, or there's a genocidal exterminationist event there or not, they're going to be there in some form or another. So if we really do care about brotherliness, then we should care enough about leveraging technology for the benefit of political culture, not just today, but into the future. We like to hyper-focus on politics and politicians who, this day and age, are more or less just the face of some type of operation. But when we get into business interests and families, we're talking about dynasties here. This is multi-generational wealth, also multi-generational managers. And so as far as we can see political despotism and what that looks like based on people not getting changed out by term limits, because if they are not changed out by term limits, then they're above the law. And so being above the law, what else do they follow, including any type of reciprocity as far as their subjects are concerned, who they might not even see as human, or certainly not value their humanity more than their own. In fact, they don't see that or feel that equality because they don't live that equality. So there's really a small difference between taking away a man's livelihood and taking away his life. It's one and the same, and yet we call these people economic actors and think, well, this is the way it's always been done, so obviously we should continue this, even though they've increased certain number of them increased their monopolistic practices, which has a very bad competitive side. So it's like, imagine you get one big bully that so undermines the other team that they can't play at all. And they call it a competition, and it's like them, showing up and running in for the touchdown and showboating every time, like doing a spike in the Newtown dance, and other teams like don't have any legs or are in wheelchairs, or there's just one person that their whole team fights against. There's just one person. And then they sort of laugh at the other team. Look at these losers, right? So it's that type of impunity, the type of handicap and impunity that they operate in. But because they sucked up and shit down, they believe the shitting down part of their life, that they should have complete freedom to do that, and they do that when they get a chance to do that. So, but the question is why should civilized or civic societies tolerate people or mechanisms like that that have such proven negative consequences on economies, and then finally the political realm, because they're so damn greedy, and because their greed involves having political cover, that it's forced these worldly misled actors into the political sphere to the detriment of the political sphere. So some people, defeatists, what have you, cynics would say, well, that was inevitable. Not really. It should be a factor at this point that is known and dealt with in various ways. So, but of course, we do have these various ways. A lot of these various ways have been encoded into law, and yet we see again and again it doesn't happen. And it certainly doesn't happen on the business side of things. So, how do you update that? I don't know. Right now, it's just a theory, but one way is, of course, taxation over a certain limit, but then you have people trying to maneuver out of those things, and that brings them into the other laundromats, and then you're dealing with known problems again. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. It's just that the current system, the current architecture, makes it impossible. A new architecture could plan for those types of things and have certain defenses in place. Political architecture in play. Political financial architecture. So again, the emphasis should be on growing small, medium-sized businesses and breaking up big conglomerations, because it was just a power grab. They don't have the management behind it. They say they have the management, they have their management practices. What they have is crappy corporate culture. And it's not just crappy now, it's become radioactively toxic. So there's that going for them, their sales pitch. So whether or not they're more productive too is a question. I mean, have they been fudging their numbers for stockholders? Is that a common practice? Or could we bring in some scientists and then just start doing some snap comparisons? Oh, this company's down 50% in productivity, but its stock price just keeps going to the moon. Wouldn't that be interesting to see what would happen if you let some scientists loose on these conglomerates that have such a toxic corporate culture and ownership structure? So if you looked at different industry, let's just say, I don't know, agriculture, and you find there's 10 companies like this, well, those are the 10 companies that could be nationalized. And then it's nationalized, but you could have some type of mechanism in place so that small and medium-sized businesses could gain access, because we don't really see things in terms of total production when it comes to sustaining a socio-economic and political infrastructure. It's a resilience measure, which isn't strictly materialist. So that's like outside of the box thinking that requires a cultural point of view. You're not coming from the bean counter school. And this is another aspect that's been brought up. These people who are in business that end up making political decisions that are completely wrong because they just have an arbitrary way of living, they can't escape the politics of their decision making at some point. And so that's another big bomb that wouldn't need to blow up in someone's face if they were so prudent as to reduce their holdings and go along with a political modernization. See, but there's always going to be people and naysayers. Don't tear down that building. That building is historically important, standing in the way of a necessary something or other. Look, I get it, but on things like of this nature, which are life and death, have massive negative implications if gotten wrong. You can't be that person screaming and shouting and pointing at things that make no sense. Because whatever problems you think we're solving or not going to solve because this or that, it's just there's other things going on. There's a big hole in the hull, so we got to crash into these places to put some metal plates on water that's rushing in. So sorry, buddy, get out of the way. Why don't you help? Grab a plate and a welding torch if you want to help out, because that's what's needed right now. We're not talking about the 20th century. Not talking about the 19th century anymore, the 18th century. We're right here, right now. So, of course things can be done better. So why don't we start doing them better? Well, what are the hindrances for that? What do we have to let go first in order to start over at zero? You have to reach that point. And yet, on the other hand, there should be no hostility towards architects of the past that tried their best. You can see that they tried. They just didn't have the right materials, or the time wasn't right there. There wasn't enough. And so you have to bring that type of dynamic flexibility into the process. It's a creative process. It's not a bummer. Just look, the old building stunk. There were bugs in it. There was this mold. The bricks were sandy. It's cold in the winter and hot in the summer. So yeah, it does represent some work. But it doesn't cut it anymore. It's in the wrong place. It's doing the wrong things. It's not working. So no, it's not tragic. There's a part of the destruction. It's not going to be tragic at all. But this doesn't mean you got to go in there with a careless attitude and just start pulling things down because you feel like it. And also what you're building back, that needs to look fantastic. It needs to work great. It needs to feel great. It needs to have longevity to it. But not permanency. It's not going to be built for permanency. It's going to be built for purpose, with the expectations that certain revisions will be made, certain improvements, but certainly not backsliding and compromise and contagion, which is the way things can go if the wrong people get in and do the wrong things with the right things. So, but that's also an eventuality. A lot of things are tragic. Some boats will not stay afloat, I'm sad to say. Some states are just going to go away. People have already said, what is Libya now? Is it 2 states? Is it 1 state? What is it? 3 states? States within states. They didn't get it. Their leadership didn't figure it out. They took a wrong turn and it had wrong consequences. And now, will it ever get back? Who knows? Maybe, if this system gets off the ground. But would they call it Libya or would they call it something else? Why would they have to call it Libya? Who came up with Libya in the first place? When in fact it's just a part of Rome, or at least was, until it got wrecked. So these things happen. This is historical cycles. These are things going on above personalities in an interconnected way. So don't just think of the doom and gloom. There's big possibilities here. There's sun breaks in the clouds. We can do this better. We absolutely can. That's the final message. And when we do things better, we'll get better results. That's how it works.